Thank you, Michael, for that wonderful and warm introduction, and I want to thank you and APTA, particularly you, Mike, for working so closely with me as we struggle through this ordeal for a reauthorization. We particularly valued, Michael, your comments as the ranking member of the Surface Transportation Committee, invited 5 of the most important people in transportation to come and tell us something, because I figured Congress must need to hear from somebody. Somebody who knows what he's talking about after 11 years with no long-term reauthorization bill. It has been an ordeal, and remember, our committee is the most bipartisan committee, and this bill, the Surface Transportation Bill, has always been the most bipartisan bill, so why hadn't it been passed? Well, first, without boring you with what you already know about a Congress which seems to be in deeper and deeper paralysis, you can get to a point of paralysis where something has to happen, and I think that may be this year. I know something has to happen with public transportation. Now, there's a reason why our bill is called a surface transportation bill. Now, if this was back in the 50s sometime, when the brilliant idea 50 years ago, and it was brilliant then, was passed, it would have been called, and aptly so, the highway bill. And there's still some old-timers who call it the highway bill. Well, the American people have long ago left the highway bill, folks. Now, I love my highways, trying to get those highways upgraded and brought up to 21st century standards. But increasingly, our bill is less about the roads and bridges than about the public transportation that uses those roads and bridges. You would not know it by the percentage of funds that goes to public transportation, to buses, to intercity rail, to streetcars, to the 21st century transportation. The fact is that public transportation has already transformed transportation itself in our country. And it is interesting how it's happened, because it certainly hasn't been because of the great leadership of the United States Congress. It's happened through public demand. The American people have simply voted on their own choices for transportation. They voted for rail. They voted for high-speed rail. They voted for our rail systems like our own metro system here. They voted for buses. Big cities, for example, like my own, the District of Columbia, with the second busiest transit system in the country, is in league with the smallest towns in rural areas who depend upon buses. We're both in the same position. If you shut down our metro system, you must shut down the government of the United States of America, and we know it because it's happened. If you shut down buses in our rural areas, small towns, then their commerce shuts down. They do not get to work by auto, and we ought to be very, very happy that they do not. Nevertheless, despite this transition, we have had a major fight for years to keep transit and bus funding even as part of the bill. I mean, one bill got brought down because of the way it took transit buses out, which was somehow to be funded by the general funds because somebody living back in 1956 said that highway funds were only for highways. That's just how far the Congress is from where the American people are. The bill, to be sure, is still overwhelmingly about highways. And at this conference in 2015, I hope, besides thinking about what is on the table before us, which is, of course, reauthorization, you will help us think about how to write this picture so that public transportation begins to get its rightful place in the highway and surface transportation bill. Because that is not even much discussed in the Congress. Congress is so busy just trying to figure out how it can get what is known as level funding, you know, as much funding as you got 2 years ago or 4 years ago, as we bring down the system that made the United States of America by failing to give it even rudimentary funding. I've had to put in a bill which I call the Transit Parity Act of 2015. Some of you haven't felt this yet, but we certainly have felt it. At the time of the stimulus funds, commuter tax benefits were made equal to benefits for people who drive and park. Because those were temporary funds, at the end of 2015, it went back to where it always was. And nothing tells us more about how Congress, how the federal government has not kept up with the transformation than that we now have a system where there is no parity between the tax benefits you get for driving and the tax benefits you get for commuting. I mean, you all ought to have some picket signs or something. I mean, it is so stark. And it's not because anyone has made that decision. It's because this bill that we call the Surface Transportation Bill is still molded in the 1950s, where public transportation was not at the forefront. So when that parity, that short period of 2 or 3 years of parity ended, transit benefits decreased to $130 here. That's just over half of the benefits of driving. Well, that's had an effect here. I'll say something for a moment about what has happened now, elsewhere, where it has not had the same effect. But it's had such an effect here that Metro almost announced, because some of us put our fingers up, and perhaps were saved only by a smoking incident last month, but they announced that they were going to have to increase fares and decrease service. The smoking incident, and took the life of one person, was a great tragedy, but it put Metro in a position that it dared not raise fares at such a moment, and so it will not. But what is amazing to me is not the position we find ourselves in, because, I mean, the reason these benefits are so important to us is that the transit system is huge and the fares are higher because it goes throughout the region. What amazes me is that in most jurisdictions, the lower gas prices has not tempted people back onto these congested roads. What does Congress need to inform them of what the American people want? Everybody predicted that as gas went down, there we go again. because our habits, it was said, were so formed by our fathers and grandfathers. And yes, there are lots of cars on the roads. And yes, many people must be in those cars. But people do not want to be in those cars. And they are showing that when we see the lowest gas prices any of us can remember, and people not hopping back into their autos. And that's that. In case you don't believe me, ask your own young people, because they are not in the car generation. These folks, these young folks, like rapid transit. They like getting on it, not having to park someplace and pay $1 gazillion, getting back on it and getting where they have to go. You talk about bar hop, they hop on our public transportation, one form or the other. So it's happening right under our noses, and we are not responding to it. I fear that so many of us will be so glad to get a reauthorization bill, we don't even care what it looks like, and just so it gets some money out here. We've got to keep pushing the Congress to follow the people where their transportation increasingly is. When public transportation ridership is double the population, I guess you told me all I need to know as a public official about what I need to do. Yet we are still stuck on the gas tax, this brilliant idea from 50 years ago. Now, I understand why everyone talks about the gas tax, but if you could have been where we were when I saw that gas tax run out last year, was it last year? And we had to struggle in the Congress just to get Congress to make up the difference so that we could get over to where we are now, May 31st. What kind of way is that for a great country to run its transportation and system and its roads? The president, of course, there are ideas out there. I still don't think there's been enough fresh thinking, because most of the ideas still are about the larger picture. Just get us some money. It's not about where the money goes. It's not about where the money is needed. It's not about the transformation in transportation itself. It's not about the coalition that exists between big cities like New York and Chicago and small towns in rural areas, which depend upon public transportation. It's just about just give us a lump sum. We need fresh thinking. I am trying to do it. I need your help. Yes, the president has a fresh idea, and there are bills that are about to be introduced, one or two may already have been introduced, that would repatriate funds that are being held overseas because of our tax rates. And those funds would be brought back here and presumably used for transportation, roads, etc., with no discussion about how that would be divided out. I'm leery about whether it's going to happen, because in order for the repatriation to make any difference, this reduction in taxes would have to be mandatory, and it would have to be enough to pay for transportation. So you just wait to, even if this happens, just wait till we get to haggling, where the money goes and what percentage will be mandatory or not, or whether, as even with the president's bill, because the president understood how far he could go, his would deal with a 4-year period and is not meant to be mandatory. So what does that say? It says we are bereft of the kind of fresh thinking that produced the great highway bill that stood us for so long and so well. We have not brought that thinking to transportation across the board. I think our bill needs pilots, it needs experimentation, it needs it in jurisdictions of various kinds so that we can bring our ideas out of our experience. Because the top-down idea, the wonderful idea of the gas tax, we appear to have no more such ideas. Even the repatriation, people are doubtful, very doubtful, will occur. We know this, that states, and I don't think I have ever seen this before, states are so desperate for highway and transportation funding that 8 have raised their own gas tax, and in 12 states there are pending bills to raise the gas tax. What are we doing? This is not the most progressive way or the most efficient way to deal with an interstate system and increasingly an intermodal system of public transportation. But the states can't be left there hanging by their fingernails, as the federal government is now doing. Transportation systems transportation systems, of course, are joined at the hip with jobs in these jurisdictions as well. So as transportation lumbers along from one 6-month fix to another, jobs suffer in these states, and finally states throw up their hands and say, we have to do something. Only the Congress is stuck on this stupid idea of our fathers and our grandfathers. Stupid now, brilliant then. No idea in a great dynamic country like this can last more than a few generations. Not with all of the changes in transportation that our great innovators will always be doing. We not only need a reauthorization bill, push us further. We need long-term stable funding of transportation in our country so that we have the kind of source that the gas tax once gave us. We know this as well, that the effect of 11 years with no long-term bill is eroding public transportation, and we know from the states I gave you just now that the American people are willing to pay for transportation. There's a lot of things they're not willing to pay for. Transportation is not one of them. What we did in the last bill cannot be done again, where we took money from buses and from bus transportation, reduced it by more than half, and said take it out of another pot, a pot that of course was in competition with other matters than buses. You can't do that. You can't shortchange one pot for another part simply because you fail to face the fact that you can't build roads, bridges, and transit without money. I do not want to be part of the generation that destroyed the great highway and public transportation system. I'm trying my best not to be part of that generation when I think of the generation that brought us the system that built our country. So there are lots of things I want. I want additional funds for transit. I want Congress to face up to where the American people are on transit. I want strengthening of apprenticeship and job training programs which go hand in glove with transit. Some of you are from places that have been where the most neglected roads in America are. The National Park Service. The National Park Service gets its funds 100% from the federal government. That's too bad if you live in the Great West, where you have these national parks that people go to because there's been no funding there. I want alternatives to the Highway Trust Fund beyond the traditional gas tax. I mean, that we passed the last or MAP 21 without even an experimentation in VMT to see, well, does it work or not? Work in one state or not? We need to have these experiments throughout our bill. At the same time, in the states, you are struggling with the first safety oversight for public transportation. We, of course, here in the District of Columbia experienced the worst metro transportation accident in 2009. And I think I did not even know then that public transportation was the only form of transportation that didn't have nationwide safety regulations. Of course we have it in rail. Of course we have it in buses. None in public transportation when we finally got a bill, but it does indeed leave a lot of the responsibility in the states with the federal government with oversight with respect to minimum standards. We got that bill passed. 30 of the states now have these safety organizations that will be so critical, and the FTA is busily at work with a new safety authority that was authorized in MAP 21. States will set their own standards, but they must conform to minimum standards. I ask you to not only see those of us who are on the Authorization Committee, but those on the Ways and Means Committee where the money is. We cannot let anywhere near May 31st come without a long-term bill. You see how this Congress operates. We got near the end for the Department of Homeland Security. And what did they do? Well, first, they tried to do a 3-week bill. The Democrats balked when they said, no, we won't do a 3-week bill. You can't keep the most important security agency in the United States open for 3 weeks. What kind of message does that send about national security? And then they say, okay, we can get the votes on our side for a 1-week bill. And Democrats said, we're not coming with a 1-week bill. And as a result, they had to pass 4 years funding for a Department of Homeland Security bill. I am willing to do that to get ourselves finally a real reauthorization bill, not a 2-cent bill that lasts for a few months. We can't let it happen again. Our side is not going to go along with it. What it means is that in your states, they're just not able to do anything. They're not able to do anything on the roads because you can't do a road unless you have money for more than 6 months. They're certainly not willing to do anything with transit, even as they are beleaguered with more people wanting to use transit. That is a capital investment. And then, of course, there are operating funds, which ought to be a part of this bill because more and more people are using this form of transportation. Public transportation has always been subsidized the world over, and it always will be. If you had to pay for your ride on anything but your car, you couldn't afford it. So we ought to subsidize the form of transportation that the American people are using. There is, my friends, what you already know, what the American people know, but the Congress will not face, and that is that we have a new travel culture in America, and it is centered on public transportation. People love cars. I drive a Ford hybrid. If I have to have a car, I want an electric car. That's a culture that's changing that we have to catch up with. And people who drive electric cars and hybrid cars don't drive great distances. When they want to go a distance, then they hop on public transportation. It has been since 2008, we have transferred $65 billion to the trust fund. That's out of general funds. The first time you had the transfer, that should have said, well, that form of funding doesn't work anymore. Let's sit down and find a new one. Instead, we keep transferring more funds from the general fund. Obsolete idea. Need new thinking. Need pilots. Need innovation. Need to catch up with 21st century America. Need to follow those of you who think about transportation all the time. And I ask you to start making us think about transportation, not as some clump of money, but as in its various component parts, especially the part that the American people are clamoring for, public transportation. Thank you for all you do for our country.